So I watched 28 Years Later in the cinemas, and I came away with one really big thing. I think that it's an excellent example in how to write a part one of your story. Splitting your films into 2 or even 3 parts I feel has become more and more common in recent years, probably because of the realization of box office potential found from certain films. My problem with this is that oftentimes these films are either one, not planned out very well, and then that causes the second part to just have to figure out what to do with all of the pieces that the first part of the movie threw at the wall. Or secondly, the first part is stretched really thin and ultimately it just proves to be pretty unsatisfying, as is the case in like Harry Potter. Cliffhangers can be really frustrating when you just want a complete package in a movie. I think there are a few indicators that show that this new 28 Years trilogy is going to be pretty intentional with its writing. It seems to be very specifically designed in the structure of a 3-act story for these 3 movies. The first example of this, I think, is found in its production timeline. The first 2 films in this trilogy were filmed back to back, and the third film reportedly began shooting this last March of 2025. This was done so that each of the films respectively could release an exact 28 weeks apart from each other. So part 2, titled The Bone Temple, is actually releasing on January 16th of 2026. And while that's just kind of a fun little detail, I think it's really important to know that these movies aren't getting sequels based on box office numbers. All 3 of these films were really shot before this first part ever got to the theater, so really that's not a shareholders thing of just like forcefully greenlighting a sequel after one already came out. Clearly, this was the plan all along. And then lastly, all 3 of these films are being written by Alex Garland, which goes a long way for a singular vision as well. With all of this setup out of the way, I want to start hopping into this film and talking about why it succeeds and how you too can write an effective part 1 of your screenplay. 28 Years Later takes a page out of Blade Runner 2049's book by not focusing on the original set of characters. Much like in 2049, one of the best legacy sequels of the modern era, the film knows that to carve out its own identity, it must first get you to buy into its new ensemble. We follow Spike, a 12-year-old boy, and his parents. The first act of the film is about he and his father making a pilgrimage onto the mainland of their isolated isle to go get Spike's first kill. The latter 2 acts really follow Spike and his mother, though, as they try to find her help for her sickness. It's interesting to think about how the original 28 Days Later so directly influenced the creation of The Last of Us and The Walking Dead. One of the biggest things that this film does to get you invested in the new cast of characters is that it leaves almost nothing on the table as far as their journeys go. While I won't spoil the journeys of his mother or father, for Spike, we take pretty dramatic character shifts in his physical capabilities and moral beliefs. During his hunt in Act 1, it sets up clearly that despite his extensive training, he buckles under fear and cannot make his shots with his bow and arrow. By the end of the film, he is able to protect himself, and in the presentation, this has served as a sort of setup and payoff for the character. For Spike's moral views, much of his internal journey is one, first questioning his father for the first time, and then differentiating himself to serve his mother in the way he deems far more honorable. This is a coming-of-age story in a sense, where he is forced to leave his household and change his worldview. The entire first act is the catalyst that sparks this change to begin with in Spike, and the film brings it to fruition by the end of it, I think. The things the film sets up are resolved for Spike by the end, leaving nothing really left on the table for the sequel. I'm glad that it's the sequel's job to find new ways to build on Spike and his parents, rather than stringing out the same threads for too long. As any good legacy sequel should, this film actively builds on the lore of the world. There are new zombie functions and types in this film, namely the alpha zombies, who are essentially herd leaders. The history around the geographical impacts of the rage virus are pretty expanded upon here, showing how the UK is in a complete quarantine and the Coast Guard keeps perimeter around the continent. Many of the ways we expand upon the world serve as fuel for the adventure in the film. They're hunted by the alpha rage zombie as the main source of external conflict. A key set piece revolves around the birth of a zombie. A new location called the Bone Temple is introduced that carries implications about the world. What's important about these nuggets being introduced, though, is that they serve to get from point A to point B for Spike's journey in this film, but it's clear that they're intentional setups for something more integral to the future films. While obviously I haven't seen those yet, between the setup of the newborn and the fact that the second film is called The Bone Temple, we're on the right track. Have the world building serve the tone and external conflict of the first film, but set them up in a way where they'll be able to continue to have greater significance to the overall story in the future installments. It's a really good formula. Since the release of 28 Days Later, the 2 largest IPs that's directly influenced the creation of are The Walking Dead and The Last of Us. to the point that the writer-director duo, Alex Garland and Danny Boyle, have made jokes publicly about the fact that they think they should be getting a revenue cut from those two projects. This original film really holds the original version of We Are the Walking Dead, stemming from the show, of course, which really is just a thematic encapsulation of the idea that we as humans are dead too. We're no better than the zombies, we're just as depraved, and we may actually be the true villains of the story. It's a piece that talks about our human nature. The third act of 28 Days Later really dives into that idea during the sequence at the military bunker. In the case of The Last of Us, it may be reasonable to assume that the dynamic found in Frank and his daughter Hannah may have inspired some of what became Joel and Ellie. In return, though, it's interesting to see how 28 years later has now come around to commit to this sort of dynamic between child and parental figure as the main protagonists. It's just cool to see the cycles of influence. Here in 28 Years Later, we explore new horrors found in humanity. The inciting incident of this film, as Spike and his father march onto the mainland, is backed by the poem Boots by Rudyard Kipling and cross-edited with archival footage of boys being sent off to World War II. Many of the themes in this film are about the glorification of war, how you're mind-washed into thinking that it can be an honorable thing at a young age, how you're disillusioned under the service of your nation, but then you wake up far too suddenly when you actually see the horrors of war face to face. Much of the central arc of Spike is coming to realize that his father is not a figure that he wants to look up to. So he takes the health of his mother into his own hands and marches into the mainland with her to try to find a doctor for her. So yeah, I think the movie is really good on its own terms, but why specifically is it such a good part one to a story? The biggest reasons are, I think, those that I already talked about, how the character arcs are completed. The ideas in the film are introduced, explored, and resolved. The ideas and threads set up for future films served well as set pieces and forms of external conflict or tone setting within this film as a self-contained experience. Much like the original as an adventure film, it effectively changes up the tone between each act. It takes bold terms which help it feel grand and sprawling, but in reality it still retains a very intimate character focus at its heart. To cap all of this off though, we need to talk about the cliffhanger, or the ending of the movie. The ending to various part ones all throughout films can be incredibly frustrating and lackluster, but what really surprised me here was that the ending had been sneakily being set up the entire movie. A disjointed intro of the film that otherwise I thought was really only meant to set the tone, Teletubbies, carvings and dead bodies that are hinting at someone's name, musical cues throughout the film, graffiti on the sides of buildings in the mainland. All of these elements were used to build into a cliffhanger that was, in nature, a huge payoff, and not something that felt like it was robbing you. In nature, yes, the ending still serves as a baton pass from one film to the other, but by being as intentional as they were with making it a satisfying reveal found in the cliffhanger, I was really overjoyed rather than left feeling hungry, if that makes sense. I think if you can sneakily build up to making your cliffhanger a payoff in this way, then that's going to make it a much better experience in making it feel satisfying. It's always disappointing to me when you kind of have a part one and part two and there's really only one part that you're going to rewatch regularly. So by doing some things like this, I think this is a really great part one, and hopefully by the time part two comes out, maybe that will have some lessons on how to do that well also if they pull it off, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Because of how well planned out this was, I'm pretty excited for those sequels. Boyle is directing the first and the third installments, but I'm glad to see that Garland wrote all three of them. So yeah, should be a solid trilogy. Thanks for watching these episodes, guys. I hope that you've come away with something helpful if you're interested in writing a part one of your screenplay. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please consider leaving it a like or subscribing, as well as ringing that little bell notification so that you know when I post videos. If you thought that it could have been better though, leave me some constructive criticisms in the comments below and let me know how to do better next time for you. Thanks guys, and I'll see you later.